You know, dating isn't exactly easy for an 18th century aristocrat like myself. I've tried all the apps and never found the right one. No woman worthy of my titles, my inherited fortune, or my land that was given to me by the crown. I was almost ready to give up on dating until I found OnlyKin. OnlyKin is a dating service that connects you only with people you are blood related to, so you can be sure that your legacy will live on in its purest form.
You know, I used OnlyKin because I just couldn't find anybody who matched my energy. Unbeknownst to me, I had a slightly distant cousin who was a perfect match for me. We get along great, we know all the same people, and now we have 7 lovely anemic sons.
You know, I was about ready to give up on guys. I thought my Prince Charming would never come. But then I found OnlyKin, and it hooked me up with a man that I knew I could trust my heart and my fortune to. And he also just happens to be my father. He's my literal sugar daddy.
You know, I was looking for a mate that had wisdom, and I just couldn't find it anywhere I looked. But when I found OnlyKin, I found my perfect match. My own grandmother. Man, talk about chemistry. Hell, forget chemistry. Biology.
Warning, OnlyKin is only operational in Europe and the southern United States. Usage of OnlyKin can lead to birth defects and even the Habsburg jaw. OnlyKin, because if they're not related, you shouldn't date it. Citizens of the Milky Way, my name is Dylan Hackworth.
And I'm Gage Hurley.
And you have arrived in the Devil's Den. That's right, folks. You have arrived at the Creep Street Podcast, where you can get all your devilish desires fulfilled. Now, follow us on Facebook and Instagram at Creep Street Podcast, Twitter at Creep Street Pod, TikTok at Creep Street Podcast. Of course, we also have a Facebook group called Citizens of the Milky Way, a Creep Street fan page. Anyone can join that. And people like to post articles in there, you know, share stories and whatnot. You can put that in there. Anyone can join. Just click the Let Me In button. One of us will let you in. And also another shout out, a call out to everyone. We are currently accepting listener stories. We want to do one here pretty soon. So we actually have some left over, I think. And so we already have some. So we're just waiting for a few more and we can compile them. Do a listener stories episode. It's been a while since we've done that. And of course, if once a week is not enough for you, and let's face it, folks, some of you, we got you by the balls. We got you by the balls, begging for more. Well, you just head on over to patreon.com/Creep Street Podcast to get some extra goodies. We got bonus episodes, got movie watch-alongs. You get to listen to the sketches early. We've got Patreon exclusive sketches, all that fun stuff, so go check that out. Now, folks, it's time we dive in. Just think about it. I want you to imagine it's a rainy night. Maybe you're alone. Maybe you're with family. You're playing a little game, maybe playing a little Yahtzee. All of a sudden, there comes a knock at the door. You open it to find a beautiful stranger. And no, I'm not talking about me and Gage. I'm talking about someone else. Well, folks, tonight's episode is
The Devil Came to Loftus Hall.
And once again, my source for this one is from that series of books we used for Screaming Skulls, Best of British Ghost Stories, a collection of true hauntings, Volume 7 by Sophie Jackson. Now, I want to give a little heads up before we start this. This one, it's one of those where there's a lot of people with the same name, and every now and then there's constant rug pulls in both directions, where you'll get a fact and be like, oh, well, maybe it didn't happen then. But then another fact will get dug up, and it's like, wait, it did happen. And it's going to bounce back and forth like that, like a game of ping pong. And so heads up, I was even having trouble following while writing my notes, but I think I got it down. And we're going to find out how it freakishly ties into a past episode of the Creep Street podcast. So let's just dive right into this. Let's dive right in. Imagine you're on the misty coasts of Ireland. Well, you got your big fisherman's sweater on, smoking on a pipe. You got a newsy hat on. I don't know. And
whatever they call those, you know the one.
Yeah, you got a pint of ale in your hand. Oh, just imagine it. Imagine that setting, because that's where we're going. There's a stretch of wild Irish coast where the winds howl and the cliffs themselves seem to almost close in around you. Not necessarily in a foreboding way, almost like in a snug kind of way. Like, They're perched on the Hook Peninsula in County Wexford. There sits a hulking, time-worn monolith known as Loftus Hall. Well, today it's a brooding, gray skeleton of a house. Its windows loom like unblinking eyes, staring out to the sea. But long before it earned its chilling reputation, long before the devil himself walked its halls, Loftus Hall was something else entirely. Now, the first known structure on this spot was built all the way back in 1170. Oh, gosh. I mean, we are talking almost 900 years ago, built by none other than Raymond le Gros, a Norman knight who knew a thing or two about conquest. That first fortress eventually gave way to a new castle around 1350, known as Redmond Hall, named after the powerful Redmond family who called it home for generations. They were a family of wealth, status, and supposedly many secrets. Because some say there was something off about this area of land from the very beginning, that it carried the weight of something old, something that seemed to be watching and waiting as the winds came screaming in off the sea. Power, as we know, is never permanent. It's always changing hands. And so is peace. By the time the Irish Confederate Wars rolled through in 1642, Redmond Hall had become more than just a family home. It was now a target. At the time, the hall was under the stewardship of Alexander Redmond, a man of 68 years, but with enough grit to trounce men half his age. He was a grizzled old badass. Alexander was said to be sympathetic to the Irish rebels, a dangerous position, mind you, when the English forces came knocking, and a knocking they did come, and they knocked hard. A small English troop led by Captain Aston rolled up on Redmond Hall expecting an easy victory. But what Aston couldn't have counted on was finding a lion-like man behind those doors. Considering Alexander's age, he was too old to flee, but also too proud to kneel. And as enemy forces closed in, he barricaded the hall. At his side were his sons, Robert and Michael, a few of their tenants, 2 hired men-at-arms, and even one itinerant tailor who, by all accounts, was only there. They had just hired him to hem a pair of breeches, only to find himself in a full-blown siege. Well, he might have come there to hem breeches, but by this point, he was probably shitting his breeches. That made 10 total defenders within Redmond Hall, armed with nothing more than just a few fowling guns, weapons literally, as they sound, intended for hunting birds and not the thick of battle. If you look them up, those early rifles, they're like half a mile long, and so you've probably seen old pictures of them. Not exactly practical for warfare, even at that time. But even while underarmed, they held their ground. Well, frustrated and enraged, Captain Aston, he kept up the assault, determined to break through the hall's heavy oak doors. Cannons he brought along were more bark than bite, and no match for the thick, centuries-old stone and iron-braced wood of Redmond Hall. They fired shot after shot, and still the door held firm. And that's when things fell apart. About half of Aston's men, either bored, hungry, or just too yellow-bellied to keep fighting, they abandoned the siege entirely and scattered into the countryside like rats from a sinking ship. Now, many of these scoundrels took to pillaging the surrounding lands instead, like a group of dickheads. They looted farms, stole from villagers, and being generally unruly bastards. What was meant to be a swift act of dominance for Aston had turned into an embarrassing fumble. And inside those walls, Alexander Redmond and his tiny band of defenders stood tall, muskets firmly in hand, as the would-be conquerors tucked tail and ran. And then, as if summoned by some sort of Lovecraftian god, the sea mist came rolling in. Thick and heavy, almost unnatural. It rolled in off the coast like a living thing swallowing the landscape in a cold, wet shroud. The air grew still. Even the birds went quiet, as the legend goes. It was under this cloak of creeping fog that the tide finally turned. From the murk, the Irish Confederates emerged, silent and swift like ghosts with blades. They descended upon the now weakened English force, and what followed was nothing short of a slaughter. Caught off guard, scattered and leaderless, only about 30 English soldiers managed to escape the carnage. The rest were cut down in the fog, their cries muffled by the coursing sea. Now imagine that. You got to think, 10 guys, only 30 survived. So that means there was more than 30 of these aggressors trying to take down this little fortress. So you got to think it's almost like, yes, of course, I'm sure it was well built and everything, but after a point, you got to think that's a miracle, right? You got to think eventually someone's going to get in. So the fact that they held that long is just really, it's almost miraculous.
It is. Reminds me of the 300 Spartans. Vastly outnumbered.
Yes. Or I think it was at the Maccabees where the story of Hanukkah comes from. They had the oil that lasted for 8 days and they held off those forces when the odds were heavily against them. Every now and then this happens in history and battle where for some reason a smaller force is able, just whether by luck, miracles, or just like good strategy, are able to overcome a much larger force. Well, Captain Aston was not among the survivors. He met his end far from home, in the mud and the mist, his blood soaking into the earth around the hall that he had failed to conquer. Reminds me of the myth of Sisyphus, I think that was Greek, right? The guy who forever is rolling a boulder uphill, but he can never quite get it to the top, but he always keeps trying. It's almost like that. It's like he just keeps trying. It's because it's like everything's wrapped up in it. It's his pride, it's everything. And he's just pushing and pushing, but he can never quite get there. And it led to his demise. He died trying to do it, literally. As far as those English who were captured, well, they were hanged the very next day. Redmond Hall had stood tall. That's another great album name, Redmond Hall Stands Tall. But the land drunk deep of the carnage, and the stones itself would seem to remember the bloody siege for centuries to come. According to Redmond family lore, the 1642 siege wasn't the last time Cromwell's forces came a-knocking. Again and again they returned armed with steel, cannon fire, and furious aggression, and each time the hall refused to tumble. But alas, stone can only do so much. Time, as always, is the true conqueror, no matter what side you're on. Alexander Redmond died within the hall, either in 1650 or 51, depending on which source you believe. And when he passed, so too did the era of Redmond defiance. With Alexander gone, his family was evicted, stripped of the land they had bled for, and in their place came a new family, the Loftus family. And just like that, the Redmond Hall era of Loftus Hall was over. the bones of the old house still beneath it, but its face changed forever. So think about that. That wasn't even the only siege. They kept sending people, and it's kind of amazing. And then kind of the biggest slap in the face of all is their main enemy. When he did die, it was probably of natural causes or just whatever, he would have probably been in his 70s by the time he died. And he died with, by nature, not by anyone else's hand. And it's also kind of sad that after all that, they just get evicted.
Yeah.
Landlords, am I right? Jesus
Landlords.
Christ, man. But consider this the prequel, because now we're diving in to the real thing. With the Loftus family came new wealth, new titles, new power, but, of course, something old yet remained. Something that had watched all of the sieges, had heard the screams of dying men in the fog, and something that knew the house had changed hands. While never forgetting who remained, the man who made it manifest was gone. And it almost makes you wonder, it's like, was Alexander Redmond blessed in a way? How this older man with only a few handful of support was able to keep holding off these intrusions. I mean, it almost makes you wonder. It's like, man, it almost seems like the divine was on his side, at least for a while. But then, of course, as the title of this episode will suggest, that's going to change here pretty soon. Enter one man named Nicholas Loftus, a man of status and favor. Nicholas Loftus had received extensive lands from Oliver Cromwell himself, carved up and handed out like spoils from a broken kingdom. And among them was Redmond Hall, which he acquired from the hands of, quote, adventurers and soldiers, a polite phrase for opportunists and mercenaries, men who reaped what they hadn't sown and sold what they helped destroy. So think about that. It's interesting that as the Redmonds held it, the place almost seemed blessed. And then as Cromwell was able to install his own people there, all of a sudden it changes to something infernal. It's literally I didn't even realize that as I was doing my research. It's wow, that sudden click of just
flip of a switch.
Absolutely. It was Nicholas's son, Henry Loftus, who would be the first of the family to actually take up residence in the old hall. But it wasn't the proud, fortified estate that it had once been. No, the war had left it riddled with damage, gutted walls, scorched timbers, and seemingly ghosts lurking in every corner. As Henry set about making extensive repairs, patching what could be patched and replacing what he could. But you can't mortar over memory, and you can't scrub blood out of wood. While the house had a new name and a new owner and a fresh paint job and a good spit shine, the land itself seemed to know that this change of hands had been made. And the story of Loftus Hall obviously does not end with Henry Loftus and the bloodstained legacy he inherited. It was merely reshaped, because by the late 19th century, the family wanted more than just stone and ghost stories. They wanted grandeur. Between 1872 and 1884, Loftus Hall was completely rebuilt, transformed into a modern marvel of Victorian architecture and design. No expense was spared.
We spared no expense.
Yeah. Spared no expense. I always loved it when he said in Jurassic Park, when he slams his cane down, he just goes, damn! When he's and he just says, damn! Oh, mommy, can't you see the fleas? The house was outfitted with the latest technology of that time, flushing toilets, blown air heating, imported materials, carved wood, decadent tapestries. The Loftus family wanted it to shine like a jewel on the Irish coast.
I didn't even know they had those things at that time. Wow.
Yeah, and I even put that in my notes, especially blown air heating, and it worked not too unlike how it does today. There's a central furnace and vents that just go to different parts of the house, and the heat comes from one source and out into the other rooms through those vents. I mean, it's literally pretty much the same model, just been upgraded, but it's essentially the same framework.
Right. Very clever.
Yes, absolutely. And so, I mean, we know, so this obviously paints a picture. These are some rich folk we got too, because you got to imagine it was probably not many people who could afford those sorts of things. They wanted, essentially, to create the jewel of the Irish coast, but what they really inherited was a burden unlike anything they could have imagined. These renovations became a monstrous financial drain, as you would imagine. I mean, heating, for God's sake. God! What are you, Jeff Bezos?
What kind of bill does that rack up every month?
Yeah. Oh, Richie Rich over here. Jeez. And all of this bled their coffers dry. Eventually, the price proved too high. And when the last Loftus died, the estate passed not to a child, not even to legacy, but to a distant cousin. Someone had little love for the house, so he did the only sensible thing. He sold it. And just like that, the last thread tying the Loftus name to the hall was cut clean. But the house, oh baby, the house remained bigger and grander, and now more hollow than ever. The recent history of Loftus Hall reads like the house itself, beautiful, yet creepy, and perhaps, maybe even a little bit cursed.
Sounds a little like Bill Skarsgård. Beautiful yet creepy.
Yeah, you know what? Yes. Someone the other day was saying that, like, how can a man be so spooky yet good looking at the same time? Yeah, it is interesting. In 1917, the house was purchased by the Sisters of Providence, who converted the estate into a convent and a girls' school, a holy sanctuary built atop the very spot where, according to legend, which we will soon get into, where the devil himself once danced in the drawing room. Think of the irony, nuns patrolling the same halls where cloven hooves had clicked and clacked down the tiles centuries before. And just so people know, I didn't know this because, I'm not Catholic, but Sisters of Providence, it's a thing. It still exists today. It's like a Catholic women's group that basically they help the, whether it's food or clothing or, they just kind of do charitable work and stuff like that. And so that's what Sisters of Providence is. Fast forward now to 1983, and the hall has changed hands again and again, and this time to a Michael Devereaux, who tried to breathe new life into the manor by transforming it into a hotel, but Loftus Hall refused to be relegated to check-in times and room service. The hotel fizzled by the late 90s, leaving the house once again silent and waiting. Customers weren't exactly laying siege to Loftus Hall, as Cromwell's men were. The Devereaux family held on to it for a few more years, but in 2008, the keys passed once more, this time to the Quigley family, who saw Loftus Hall for what it truly was, a legend. They opened the house to the public, not as a hotel or a school, but as a portal into Ireland's darkest folklore. Today, Loftus Hall welcomes guests not for rest, but for ghost hunts and paranormal investigations and late-night tours where brave souls walk the same halls that were said to echo with the hoofbeats of the devil, the sounds of weeping, and the faint smell of brimstone. No, that's not a scented candle, that's hellfire.
Oh, is that what that is? Oh.
Yes, ooh.
It smells kind of good. It's like a bonfire.
Ooh, Because you can rename a house, that's for sure, and you can paint it, repair it, and sell it 100 times over. But when the devil sat at your table, baby, that's a stank that just doesn't come out. And if you think Loftus Hall has grown quiet in its old age, well, think again, suckers. The Quigley family don't shy away from the house's reputation. They embrace it. They promote it. They promote it as a place for the public to have, possibly paranormal experiences. And according to them, the spirits are very active, as if centuries of tragedy, betrayal, and intrusion have left the house crackling with leftover rage. One of the most chilling encounters in recent years didn't come from thrill seekers or ghost hunters. It came from ancestors, a group of descendants of Alexander Redmond, that Alexander who held off Cromwell's forces until the day he died. They traveled from Dublin to visit the hall, hoping perhaps to reconnect with some of their ancestral past. Oh, and the house was waiting for them. As they approached the property, they were confronted by the spirits of their Redmond ancestors, it said. An ethereal council of long dead standing watch over the bones of what was once theirs. And what did they tell these ancestors? They were told with cold, clear certainty to never return. Not until they had hosted a feast in honor of their lost family name. Until then, the dead would not rest, and the living would not be welcome. So that's a little speed run of Loftus Hall, of the land, of the structure, going back to literally medieval times, where I heard you can get a good leg of lamb and watch a good show. Well, let's get to the meat. Let's get to the main course. We've had our appetizer, we've had our salad. Let's get that steak, baby. But for all its history of blood and battle, Loftus Hall is remembered most not for a siege or a skirmish, but for a single visitor. A stranger that would leave an indelible scar on the legacy of the place. The most infamous legend tied to the hall takes root in the 18th century, when the estate was under the care of Charles Tottenham and his wife, Anne Loftus, and their daughter from a previous marriage, also named Anne. In a move that was as political as it was personal, Charles had taken the Loftus surname upon marrying Anne. What a cuck.
Yeah, you don't hear about that even much these days, let alone back then.
Yeah, and I'm just teasing, of course. That's just as fine. But yeah, especially back then, he must have I wonder if he had a family gripe or something. The sources don't really get into it, but it says for political reasons, or maybe he needed, because the Loftuses once held the place, maybe it's he needed to change his name in order to be maybe.
Yeah,
maybe it was more
sense.
a male needed to inherit it or whatever, so he therefore had to change his name. Maybe that's what it was. Who knows?
I've always said that I feel like when two people get married, maybe the best thing to do is to create a new last name. I think that would be the most fair.
Hey, there's a reason Brangelina stuck, or Benifer. There's a reason those names stuck, and why those marriages lasted. And why those marriages were so happy and long.
Because, you can't hyphenate forever.
Yeah.
The name will just get longer and longer and longer each generation, but yeah.
Absolutely.
Maybe, combine those. Tom Smith.
Yeah. And isn't it funny, literally the last name Smith, how many last names, surnames came out of literally your fucking job?
Yeah, exactly.
Like a blacksmith, like Christopher Plummer. I wonder where that one came from.
Pleased to meet you, Dirk Ditch Digger.
Hey, they call me Sam Sewage. Nice to meet you.
Sam Waste Disposal.
Sam Waste Disposal. Oh, man. And so when he did this, by changing his name, he secured himself not just a wife, but land, title, and status. So yeah, it was probably to inherit it. They probably, as things worked back then, you needed most of the times you needed a male or something to inherit some. So maybe he did change his name for that purpose. So he was cucked by choice.
Yeah, at least by choice.
Well, the year was 1775. The family was at home, tucked away from the world as a vicious storm was rolling over the Hook Peninsula. By the way, this all takes place in southeast Ireland. So the Hook Peninsula, it's literally what it sounds like. It's like a land kind of that hooks out into the sea, and the home's built out there on the cliffs overlooking the sea. It literally sounds like a dream. As spooky as the place is, it sounds like a Hallmark movie waiting to happen.
It's their Florida.
Absolutely, it's their Florida, exactly.
Got that little panhandle.
That's right there in Wexford County, southeast Ireland. Rain lashed out against the walls. Like I said, this was a rager of a storm. Wind and rain was whipping the sides of Loftus Hall, and it made the stately manor creak and groan. And out at sea, a ship was fighting for its very life to stay afloat. Its sails were torn and its hull was cracking under the weight of the gale. Against all odds, the ship made it to shore. And from it, a handful of passengers disembarked, trudging through the mud and wind toward the only light in sight. Well, among these sailors, among this group of people who were on the ship, was a young man who happened to be traveling alone. By all accounts, he was very well dressed, striking in appearance, probably like a Bill Skarsgård, with eyes they described that hardly blinked, and a smile that maybe seemed just a little too practiced. Already, this is giving me the impression of something trying to appear normal. Sort of like we talk about with black-eyed kids, something that is putting on a costume in a way.
That uncanniness.
Exactly. Almost as if this person might even be trying to appear human. And as fate would have it, he knocked on the door of Loftus Hall and was cordially welcomed in. Because unlike black-eyed kids, this person did a much better job of playing that role. Right away, the family at Loftus Hall was charmed by this mysterious fellow. He was elegant, well-spoken, well-groomed, and was friendly and personable. He was a man of means, or at least so it seemed by his appearance and, how he talked. Though when asked about his origins or even his destination, his answers were always vague. But the Loftus family still welcomed him in all the same, offering him temporary lodging while he waited for better weather. However, that nasty weather would never seem to blow over. Literally, it went on for days. And then days turned into weeks. It's as if a storm stopped right over this little section of Ireland. And as the rain fell outside, something else was blooming within the hall. A growing affection between the mystery man and the young Anne Tottingham. And the daughter, of course, not the wife.
Let's hope not.
I know, right? Damn, what a MILF. Anne Tottingham, talk about MILF Manor. Oh my God, Loftus Hall. Whew, MILF Manor.
Totty was a bit of a tart.
She was a bit of a tot in her day.
And Tottingham.
Well, these two were often seen, speaking quietly in corners, walking the halls together, exchanging glances that seemed to hint at a budding romance. And the rest of the household watched with mild amusement. I'm sure probably the parents were thinking, they don't really say what age we're talking about here, but back then, who knows, they might have been the same age, who knows if the guy was older, but I'm sure the family's looking at him and he seems like a smart guy, good looking. He seems to probably have some kind of money and well spoken. I'm sure that.
Yeah, seems like Bay material.
Absolutely. Come here, boo. And then came the solitary night that made Loftus Hall infamous to this very day. The family had gathered in the drawing room. The fire was a-crackling. The wind outside, as it had been since the night the mystery man arrived, was still howling against the window. So the family was playing cards by candlelight, a simple game. Each player dealt 3 cards. The young man, he dealt with a practiced ease. He played some cards and shot some dice in his day. His face was smooth as ivory, it said. But when it came to Anne, she only got 2 cards. The butler, who was standing off to the side with a tray in hand, noticed what happened. But just as he opened his mouth to speak, Anne bent forward. The 3rd card had fallen to the floor. Hey, that happens, right? Especially if you ever been dealing cards, sometimes a little wind or a little something can, blow. That's natural. Especially, if the winds are howling outside, it's probably drafty in there. So Anne bends over, pick that 3rd card off the floor. She reaches down, and that is when she saw it. Not a shoe, not a stocking, but a foot, dark and cracked, ending in a cloven hoof. Anne didn't scream, not yet at least. For a moment, the air went utterly still, and it said that the candles sputtered, and the fire gave a low hiss. I think everyone sitting at the table noticed a shift in Anne. Everyone's probably laughing, having a good time, and then all of a sudden when one person just clams up and goes pale, everyone it goes quiet. That is when Anne let out a cry so sharp It literally startled the hell out of everyone. Anne's scream rang through the hall like a bell tolling for the dead. Everyone turned. Her face was pale, her eyes wide, not even exactly with fear, but with shock. The kind of soul-shaking recognition that hits somewhere beneath the ribs. With trembling hands, she pointed under the table. She whispered 2 words. "His foot." The room fell silent. The stranger was still smiling, though now something tight had crept into that smile. Slowly, he rose to his feet. Anne's voice cracked as she shouted, "What are you?" And that's when it happened. Without a word, the man, this thing, shot straight up into the air, through the ceiling, through the rafters, and into the night sky above, literally like a rocket taking off, leaving behind a jagged, smoking hole in the ceiling. Of course, the room falls to pieces. Panic, screaming. Anne collapses, trembling. She's like, you can't blame her. Can't imagine anyone still standing at this point. The butler dropped his tray, which is a lot for a butler.
He's got one job.
Jesus, butler. The fire hissed low in the grate, and silence finally returned. Only one conclusion could be drawn. One that passed in a whisper from mouth to mouth around the table, but never quite said out loud. The man that they had welcomed into their home in the storm was the devil himself. Loftus Hall had willingly let him in. What followed was not just fear, but ruin. Anne Tottingham was never the same. It said that the light in her eyes, which she had always had, seemed to dim. Her laughter, once soft and sweet, turned into mumbled whispers, low, as if she was talking to herself. She was often heard crying, whimpering behind locked doors. Whatever she had seen beneath that table, whatever truth had stared back at her, it hadn't just frightened her, it had literally broken her. In fact, the hole in the ceiling seemed to refuse to be properly repaired. No matter how many carpenters or masons were brought in, the ceiling always sagged or cracked, just like the house itself had been branded by what had passed through. A scar had been left that could not be hidden or erased. Obviously, as we know, in 1775, mental health, obviously, as we all know, not understood or respected as it is today. Her family, this is the most tragic part of it all, her family almost grew ashamed of their daughter, unsure and more concerned with appearances than their daughter's well-being. So they quietly just kind of locked her away in her favorite room, which was the tapestry room. A room that was once filled with color and warmth, now was almost like a gilded prison. They told themselves that she'd be safe there, that she might even be happy. But she wasn't. Anne refused food, refused water. It said she would often just sit huddled in a chair, knees drawn up to her chin, her eyes fixed endlessly on the gray horizon of the sea beyond the window, as if watching and waiting. Perhaps she was waiting for the man that she had initially fallen for. Or maybe she was standing watch in case the devil may return. But the mysterious stranger never did return to Loftus Hall. Rather, it seemed to have taken something with it. The joy and perhaps even the sanity of the young Anne Tottenham. And then one day, Anne died. But even in death, the horror lingered. When her body was discovered, those who tried to properly lay her body flat, lay it down, found that they couldn't. Her limbs would not bend. She had seized up, locked in the same twisted position she had kept in life. Her knees drawn up, arms tight around her legs, eyes open and fixed out the window onto the sea. And as the story goes, the distraught family had no choice but to bury her sitting up straight. And some believe she never truly left that room at all, which to me, I think almost, if that's true, that almost implies neglect, because that means she had probably died, and then they just did not check on her. They were probably like, oh, at least she's quiet now.
You're right. I mean, that sounds like her body was probably left after she passed for a long time.
Right. It's called, what do they call it? Rigor mortis? Is that what they call it? Where your body almost, it seizes, and that's what it sounds like to me. I mean, maybe it was something supernatural, but I mean, it sounds like how they treated her after this event. It seems like she was probably neglected and probably left dead for a while. Yeah, it's really messed up too. I mean, there were other people who witnessed this whole thing. It's not like they don't know or don't believe her, right? I mean, they were there. They saw the same thing. She was clearly just very traumatized by it. And that's another good point, Gage, is like, you motherfuckers saw it too. Like, it's not like she came home with this story. You guys got a front row seat and saw what happened. So how can you blame her? Yeah, I don't know. Maybe at the time, maybe they were afraid that if somehow their name and their home was associated with the devil, that something would befall. Maybe they'd get, who knows, a mob would come, and who knows what I think. But it's like, you bastards saw it too. It's not like, God, you're right. It's like, Jesus, you bastards saw it too. Like, in my opinion, just the most tragic part of all this is how this sweet young woman was treated after this happened. It's just so sad. As we already know, the hole through the ceiling left by the stranger's violent exit through the roof could never be truly repaired, no matter how many times they patched it, plastered it, or smoothed it over. It always cracked, peeled, or sagged like the house was remembering what had happened. Even today, they say there's a section of ceiling where the plaster just doesn't look quite right. Even with modern building materials, it's never quite the same shade or texture. And today, many visitors who pass beneath it, some pass by underneath it every day, never noticing anything, but others, even without knowing the legend, they'll stop, look up, with the sensation that there's something above them looking down at them, without even knowing that part of the story. Like, maybe it's a haunted, but there's something about that spot. That's a really weird part, too, is the hole not being, easily repaired. I mean, what in the world would cause that? Exactly. And it's also interesting to know, we think of, out of common, we associate the devil with below. It's interesting that he shot into the sky, which, obviously, if you go by the Abrahamic idea of the devil or Lucifer, he was an angel at one point and fell from grace. So maybe that's part of it. But yeah, interesting that he went up, and his exit, it's not even like he just burst into flame and vanished. He literally took off like a fucking rocket. Like that's so interesting. I bet he was reincarnated as Dennis Rodman with those hops. Yes. He got that rebound, baby. But alas, Anne did not get her rebound. Death, though, would not be the end of Anne's story. It only opened the next terrifying chapter. Because after her burial, seated and frozen as she was in that final twisted posture, the house did not fall quiet. In fact, it grew unruly. Doors slammed on their own. Candles blew out with no wind. Furniture moved. Objects vanished. Phantom voices echoed through empty rooms. And at night, there was the sound of hoofbeats thundering across the floorboards with no rider in sight. The locals began to murmur rumors that the stranger might have returned. Perhaps not in a bodily form, but the locals grew to fear that the devil, or whatever he truly was, had come back to torment the family, to claim what had not been given freely. And why the Loftus family? We don't know. What sin could they have possibly committed that invited this curse upon them? No one could say. But if the devil had marked this house once, he now seemed determined to make it his own. Protestant priests were brought in, summoned from nearby towns to cleanse the hall, to banish the force that was tormenting it. They performed blessings, prayers, even full-on exorcisms. But nothing they tried seemed to lift the gloom that hung over Loftus Hall. The strange happenings continued, growing bolder and more dangerous. The house itself felt possessed, like it was alive. Every creak in the floorboards carried a threat of untold horrors. Every gust of wind sounded like a malevolent voice. And keep in mind the fact that even the surrounding towns were scared of this place. Even living within a few miles of this palatial estate was too much for a lot of people to even deal with. They didn't even want to be within like a few miles of it. So this is probably what the family was afraid of, why they kept their poor daughter locked away. It was, like we said, it was probably appearances. Well, the family was desperate, and they turned to someone much closer to home, a Catholic priest named Father Thomas Broder, a man of the cloth, yes, but also a tenant of the estate, a figure who knew the land, who knew the people, and perhaps a way to lift the darkness that had befallen the house. And unlike the others who came and tried, Father Broders was said to succeed. What he did exactly is lost to history, whether it was prayer, ritual, or something else. But according to the legend, he ended the reign of the poltergeist that had been left in the wake of the stranger's visit. And finally, the house fell quiet once more. But while Father Broders was able to quiet the terrifying paranormal phenomenon that had been running rampant in Loftus Hall, no one ever believed that the evil was truly gone. Rather, it was just sleeping. Because whoever or whatever that poltergeist was, it didn't haunt the house alone. And I want to stop there. There's something to it. This is part of what I love about these stories as you get so much history is go back to Alexander Redmond, who was sympathetic to the Catholics, Irish Catholics, held the place, and all the English Protestant forces couldn't bring the place down. And then the second Protestant family gets in there, things go to hell. They bring in Protestant priests to try to cleanse the place. Nothing works. A Catholic. Now, this might be a cause and effect of, if a place is primarily, like, say, Catholic, maybe through the years, you're inclined to add that flavor to be like, but the Catholics, like I can remember, Gage and I grew up Protestant, and, people would always tell stories about how, the Catholic priests couldn't do it, but then someone came in and laid their hands on it, and they and I'm not saying that what happened wasn't real, but it's kind of interesting. It's an interesting picture to paint that at least in this area, it took Catholicism to at least dampen the paranormal activity. The Protestants just couldn't do it and couldn't even bring the place down in battle, which was interesting. Even though the Catholics that were held up in that fortress were vastly outnumbered. In recent years, visitors to Loftus Hall have reported encounters not just with things that go bump in the night, but with the ghost of a young woman. Pale, hollowed eyes, drifting through the corridors as if lost. Some say she's often seen peering out of the tapestry room in the window, her face pressed against the glass. Others say they felt her presence at the top of the stairs, where the light always seems to shine just a little bit dimmer than anywhere else, for no reason. There's nothing blocking it, but for whatever reason, light just seems to shine a little dimmer at the top of those stairs. Well, of course, most believe it to be Anne Tottingham herself, still searching for the stranger who broke her heart and shattered her sanity. Or perhaps she's fleeing from him. As we said before, it was always unclear if the silent and traumatized Anne stood watch, hoping that the man she loved was going to return, or in fear that the devil might return. Most likely, it was a little bit of both. But of all the spirits that may linger in that house, the one that captures imaginations and terrifies visitors the most is, of course, the question of the devil. Did he really come on that stormy night in 1775? Did he sit at that table and play that game of cards and reveal himself with a cloven foot and a grin that split the soul? Or was it all just a story? Maybe a tale, maybe even made up by the family to explain their daughter's ailing state. Maybe they preferred, maybe it was the opposite. Maybe they preferred, oh, the devil just ruined our daughter's mind, to just know our daughter's struggling with mental health. You know, that too. Maybe it was literally, they literally would prefer, because as we know, eventually the towns all around it all knew about it. So that means like people were talking. So yeah, maybe that was it. Maybe they preferred that story over the truth.
Yeah. And like you said, mental illness back then was not looked at the way it is today. And so that's the kind of thing, yeah, you could totally understand that those people at that time would be worried about that kind of a reputation. But like, let's just tell them that the devil came to our house instead. That, like,
right, exactly. Well, some even say that the tale may have been crafted by the family to keep curious beggars and wayward travelers away, or from trying to stay overnight, or even just, if they're visiting, overstay their welcome, which, you know, I'm sure was practiced at, you know, oh, the place is haunted. You don't want to go, you know, see you later.
I don't think you should stay for dessert.
Right. It's like, you know, you say, sorry, I don't have any cash, man. You know, that sort of thing. It's, you know, only just on a more grander scale. But we do know this. The hole in the ceiling is still there. And the tapestry room still runs very cold. And when the winds howl just right across the Hook Peninsula, it literally sounds like someone laughing. You also have to wonder why the devil took so long to reveal himself. He was there, it's according to the legend, for weeks. You would think the cloven hooves would have been noticed rather quickly at some point, right? You'd think for weeks someone living with you, even with shoes on, it's not, you know, click, clack. I mean, it's going to be hard to wear normal shoes.
Plus, they say he's a handsome guy. You think nobody snuck a peek while he was in the shower?
Absolutely. That's right. You know, and so maybe, here's another thought. Maybe, this was just something I thought, and I'm sure other people have said this, but maybe there was an amiable young man that had arrived that stormy night and had stayed with them. Perhaps something spirited him away, only to take his appearance that night and scare. So maybe there was a boy that she fell in love with, and the devil, whatever, or something, and it took his place for the day. And then, like, because it says when she saw it, it gives you such a cinematic, spooky, when she said, he stands there with a smile, and it's like, and then he just slowly stands up. I mean, it cinematically is terrifying. So clearly, it seems like he chose that moment. So yeah, it makes you wonder, maybe he either just played the long game to kind of really dig in a sense of betrayal almost, you know, get someone to fall in love with you only then to pull the rug out, or maybe there was a good, honest young man there that was taken or just spirited away somehow, and that night the devil took his place.
Right. I mean, assuming that, let's just say it was the devil in disguise, that is a pretty cruel way to go about it. Have somebody almost basically falling in love with you, only to turn around and not just like end things, but to reveal yourself as what she thinks is the devil himself. That could be the most traumatizing thing he could come up with.
Right. And, you know, and would obviously scar for life. She'd probably be hesitant to ever fall in love again. Because you're like, well, what if this is the devil again pretending to be, you know what I mean? So it kind of ruined, like, her outlook on love and all that stuff. And then you add in her parents' treatment of her post-event. She's probably like, love is not fucking real at this point. Like, she might just be literally like, you know, it's such a sad, lonely state, it sounds like. Well, just when you think you've got the story straight, that the devil's hoof prints have dried and Anne's ghost has taken her seat in the tapestry room, history begins to unravel the threads of this infamous tale. Now, this is where we got to put on our detective caps, folks, because this is where there's like constant rug pulls here. According to some historical sources, Anne Tottingham, the daughter of Charles Tottingham, who married the Honorable Anne Loftus. Remember, there was two Annes. Anne Loftus, the mother, was the daughter of the first Viscount Loftus. But this marriage, according to actual historical records, happened sometime in the mid-1600s. And together, Charles and Anne had 6 children, including Anne and a sister named Elizabeth. After the death of his wife, Charles remarried a woman, Jane Cliff, who also happened to be his cousin. Oh boy, which, at the time, especially in aristocracy and especially in royalty, early on, I think episode 12, we literally did a whole episode on royal inbreeding. Isn't it ironic that today it's seen as one, it's just, illegal and gross, but we see it as that's something that hicks in the backwoods would do. When back then it was no, that's only something the
royalty do, yeah.
Marry someone I'm not related to? How dare you? So, just so happened to be his cousin, and thus he continued to live out his days at the Hall, which, of course, at the time was a perfectly ordinary aristocratic life. Even the marrying your cousin part probably even made it more so. But here's where the math starts to get fuzzy. If the version of the legend that gives Anne's death occurring in 1775, well, if she was born in the mid-1600s, as these records suggest, that would have put Anne somewhere in the ballpark of 100 years old when she died, not the young damsel that the story described. So what does this mean? Was the tale stretched and reshaped over time, picking up pieces and dropping some along the way? Perhaps the story really did happen, only far earlier than 1775. Or was the Anne of the story another Anne entirely, mistakenly attributed to Anne Tottingham from the prior century? Was there even a stranger at all? And that is precisely the limbo where the legend lives. Now, just when you think you've sorted out all the players in this twisted tale, plot's gonna plot and plot's gonna thicken. Because, darling, the Honorable Anne Loftus, she was very real. Anne Tottingham's mother was very, very real. We know this for a fact. She was the daughter of Nicholas Loftus, as we know, the first Viscount Loftus of Ely, E-L-Y, it's Eli or Ellie, who knows, and the granddaughter of Henry Loftus, the same Henry Loftus who first made Loftus Hall the family's principal residence back in 1666. So far, so good. Let's remember, too, there are 2 Annes, like we said, Anne the mother, Anne Loftus, and Anne Tottingham the daughter. Anne had a sister named Elizabeth, which may help explain the confusion that bubbles up in the legend, where some versions speak of 2 daughters, Anne and Elizabeth, sometimes interchangeable, sometimes distinct, depending on the source. The Anne that we do know exists wasn't an only child. She also had 2 brothers, and it was they, not her, who would inherit the hall, given, how things worked back then. It always went to a male. Her eldest brother, Nicholas, lived at Loftus Hall until his death in 1766. After that, the property passed to their younger brother, Henry Loftus, who took on the title but had no children of his own. When Henry died in 1783, the title went extinct, and the bloodline, at least as far as succession went, came to an abrupt halt. And yet, the legend says Anne died in 1775. So maybe the confirmed Anne that we do know existed was not the Anne of the legend. Or maybe the legend took root with a different Anne, one that might have been lost to the archives, especially if people were ashamed of her mental health. Maybe they, once she died, kept her off records, almost like a blemish. That's very possible, too, that she was purposely kind of sort of erased from the lineage in a way, which is even more sad if that's the truth. It's God. So Charles Tottingham and Anne Loftus, they did indeed marry sometime before 1743, as the other version of this tale goes, that some sources hold. Together they had 3 sons, Charles, born 1743, Nicholas, born 1745, and Ponsonby, born in 1746. Someone bring that name back. I've never heard of that. Ponsonby. Well, these 3 boys are documented, but no record of a daughter. So no Anne the Younger. And unless some parish record was lost to time, there's no reliable evidence that Charles did marry again to Jane Cliff after Anne's death. He lived a long life, dying in 1795 quietly without scandal. See, there's all these different historical records. As I was compiling this, I think this is one of those things because of how scattered and how a la carte the history sources are, you'll never fucking get to the crux of it, because it always leaves the window open for almost anything.
So it's just fun to wonder.
It is.
It is a fun, interesting mystery and an interesting story. And yeah, but there's just all kinds of possible explanations. I mean, just the writing out of Anne seems very probable if they were that ashamed of her.
Right. And here's the thing, this is where it almost gets poetic. In certain sources where Charles Tottenham did have daughters, he reportedly died on the anniversary of Anne's death, the same day, just a different year. Just would be a pretty wild coincidence. Because even if there was no daughter, even if the names don't line up, the birth dates don't match, and the records say no, the story still persists. And so the legend of the girl who played cards with the devil lives on, without a clean name and without a proper date. Now, just when we think we finally laid the story to rest, that we've crossed our T's and dotted our I's and put this thing to bed, and put the Tottenham girl to rest in the record books, the branch's twisted web of conspiracy twists again. Because if Charles Tottenham and Anne Loftus are dead ends in this devilish little legend, if their bloodline or their ancestral line stopped there, what if we've simply been looking at the wrong pair of Tottenhams? Let's look at another limb of the family tree. Anne Loftus, the one we know existed, the daughter of Nicholas Loftus of the Viscount of Ely, or Ely, she did have a sister named Elizabeth. And in 1736, Elizabeth married, get this, Sir John Tottenham, who just so happened to be the brother of Charles. That's right, the sister married the brother. I think that's how the math works out. Or at least stepbrother, I have no idea. It starts to get so wacky. The 2 branches twist together. John and Elizabeth had at least 4 children that we know of. And you know what? One of them was a little girl named Anne.
You know, they were very creative with their names, were they?
I mean, good God almighty. I mean, I literally, as I'm doing this research, I'm like, am I even making sense with this? But I think it will all come full circle. Because history, ever the trickster, has pulled the rug out from under us once again. This Anne, the daughter of Elizabeth and Sir John, she married a Joseph Rogers in 1756. Another elegant dead end. So she was literally, that would imply that she's the child of incest, I guess. Their daughter, Eleanor, she married a Reverend John Orr. Mary married a man named Richard Ansley. And this is all proper, documented, and accounted for. So let's go back to Henry Loftus, where the attachment of the Loftus family to this house begins. Henry Loftus. As we know, he was the very first of the family to make Loftus Hall his principal home in 1666. The timing is right. The atmosphere is right. And yes, he also had daughters. 2, in fact. So it's like, how many Annes? There's so many Annes. What's interesting is that the tale of the devil visitor actually surfaced in the late Victorian era, nearly a century after it supposedly took place. A girl named Anne Tottenham, born, according to some tellings, in 1744, which would make her line up with the original story to, have had her encounter in 1775. That would place her exactly between the births of Charles and Nicholas Tottenham. And of course, there's no reliable record of her. No baptism, no marriage, no obituary, no paper trail at all. Maybe that version of Anne Tottenham never lived. Or maybe she lived and, like we said, maybe was erased from the records. As the tale goes, her family was ashamed of their daughter's declining mental state, and maybe they wanted her erased from the records. Well, there's one last wrinkle in this story, one last name in the margins that refuses to fade. In 1882, a Reverend George Reed published one of the earliest written accounts of the tale, the version that would help cement Anne's place in folklore. But this wasn't just a fireside ghost story. No, Reed's telling was deeply personal. You see, Reverend Reed had ties to the Loftus family. He had been appointed to a living by Lord Robert Tottenham, and both he and his father had spent time at Loftus Hall. Walked the long halls, listened to the wind batter the stone bones of the place, and apparently felt a little something there. Something was off. They experienced what he would call later, quote, odd things, phenomenon that linked back to the tale of Anne, though he never claimed to had seen her, but he didn't need to. The ghostly presence was enough. And it's through Reed that the legend began to solidify, no longer just folklore of the Hook Peninsula, but a story that would now spread far and wide. But Reed's account didn't even speak of the devil crashing through the ceiling or Anne screaming at a cloven foot. He gave us something far more grounded and far more tragic. According to Reverend Reed, the story unfolded sometime in the 1770s. On a stormy night, a young gentleman was lost and weary. He arrived at Loftus Hall seeking shelter. The family took him in, and over the course of his stay, a connection bloomed between him and the young Anne Tottenham. It was a real affection between two living mortals. But Anne's father, Charles Tottenham, did not approve. One day, the man was simply gone. Anne was told he had left. No message, no goodbye, just vanished. But she never believed that. She knew the man she had fallen in love with wouldn't just leave without telling her. Even if he was being forced to leave, he would still tell her, hey, I'm getting forced to leave. And from that moment on, Anne fell apart. She withdrew to her favorite space in the house, the tapestry room, and never came back out. It said, according to Reed, that she sat for days, weeks, even years, staring out at the sea, waiting, her health in decline, her mind unraveling, until she was finally gone. But that's not where the story ends. Many years later, man, that we just keep getting dealt Joker cards here. Many years later, during renovation work on the house, rumors began to circulate. Workmen claimed they had found something sealed behind the wall in the tapestry room. A skeleton. Some believed it was the remains of Anne's lost lover, that Charles Tottenham, desperate to keep the pair apart, murdered the young man and hid the body behind the stone. Talk about a protective father. And, you can also imagine there's probably some variations where they say Charles even made a pact with the devil to keep them apart. But another version takes an even darker turn. Some say the skeleton wasn't a man's, but an infant's. A new theory rose that Anne had not died of grief at all, but rather in childbirth, hidden away by a family ashamed and afraid of scandal. The child died too. And the truth, the body and the heartbreak and the secret was entombed in plaster and forgotten until the walls gave it back to us. Either way, the house never forgot. So whether it was the devil, a murdered suitor, or a mother and child buried in secrecy, Loftus Hall still has good reason to be haunted by something. But here comes even more strange facts that muddy the waters. Though Reverend George Reed's version of the tale was a somber tragedy of a young woman broken by forbidden love and not the devil, well, that horned bastard still found his way into the tale. And wouldn't you know it, it started with Reverend Reed's own family. Reverend Reed's father once stayed at Loftus Hall himself, long before the legend was ever made folklore. It was 1790, and the house was still wearing the grief of its former occupants, like a funeral veil. And that night, Reed's father was given a room to sleep in, the tapestry room. And according to Reed, in the middle of the night, something heavy leapt upon his father's bed, landing with a thud that rattled the floorboards. And whatever it was growled, almost like a dog, low and guttural, the way like a dog when it's angry or it can sense something. The sound was something beastly. And then the bed curtains were yanked back, torn open with force. The bedclothes ripped away, flung into the air as though by invisible hands. But no one was there. Just the terrified Mr. Reed in his bed. So maybe Reverend Reed tried to give the story a gentler face. Maybe he preferred to believe in heartbreak instead of hellfire. According to George Reed's account, when his father was shaken from his sleep by that midnight assault, the growl and the rip of the curtains and the weight on his chest, he didn't think it was a ghost. He thought it was a prank. He was convinced that someone, maybe one of the servants or a mischievous youth, was behind the spooky event. And just as any man of reason would do in the 18th century, he shouted into the room, pistol in hand, warning whoever it was to back the hell off. And then with a thunder crack of righteous frustration, he fired the pistol up the chimney, assuming the intruder had hidden there. But it was only after the echo died and the smoke had cleared that he realized the door was locked from the inside. No one had entered. No one had left. The room was sealed. Whatever had pulled the curtains back, whatever had growled in the dark, whatever had stripped the bedclothes from him, had done so without ever opening the door. Now, some believe this points not to a ghost, but to a different kind of entity, a more mischievous one, a poltergeist. And as we know today, poltergeist activity is actually rarely tied to the dead. Instead, it tends to cling to the living, especially the young, the emotionally charged, those caught in transition or trauma. So maybe that thing in the tapestry room was not the devil, but maybe it was the soul of poor Anne, or maybe it was the house itself. Whether it was a ghost, a poltergeist, or just echoes of too much grief sealed in the home's foundation, something moved through Loftus Hall that night, and it left a man of reason holding a smoking pistol and more questions than bullets. You got to think he must have thought that it was something, so because if you think it's like one of the kids, why the hell would you shoot?
Right. He must have been convinced it was an intruder.
Right. He must have been convinced it was either like a bandit or something supernatural, because if you thought it was a prank or like something must have spooked him to a degree that he thought he needed to actually fire the gun.
I mean, it sounds like it's weird, it growled at him, but he's talking like it was a person. Talking like he was convinced it was a person, especially he thought it went up the chimney, so he fired up the chimney. I mean, I guess an animal could do that too, but the way he spoke.
Right. And it makes you wonder, maybe being a, quote, man of reason, he refused to let himself believe that it might be something supernatural. And it was sort of like him fighting away that, it's not possible. You know what I mean? It's something like that. It has to be someone of flesh and blood, to the point where he's got to almost kill someone to believe it. He's got to draw blood just to know that it wasn't something supernatural. By 1790, Loftus Hall was once again changing hands, at least legally. The man now occupying it was Charles Tottingham, the son of John Tottingham and Elizabeth Loftus. So it's another Charles. Sister to the much discussed Anne. So this would have been the Anne of the legend would have been this Charles's aunt, not the father Charles. That was so that. Yeah. Once again, keeping up with these names. So this was a different Charles. This was a gesture, both political and symbolic. A new name, a new era. Charles lived there until 1806, when the hall passed to his son, John Loftus, and under John's watch, the house stirred once more. One night, a valet in John's service was given the tapestry room as his sleeping quarters, a decision that would prove unfortunate. In the dead of night, the hall was ripped from its slumber by the man's screaming. It was said to be loud and maniacal. The servants rushed to his door expecting to find thieves or, a fire or something. What they found was a man shaking with fear, barely able to speak. He claimed that as he laid in bed, the curtains had been violently torn aside, and standing there, looming over him, was a tall woman, her face pale, her features unreadable. He had fled the room barefoot, still in his nightshirt, refusing to ever step foot in there again. Now, some say it was Anne herself, still pacing in the tapestry room, in the gown she wore the night her heart was broken. Others say it was something older, something the family tried to confine, which slipped through anyway, just enough to remind them that the house was never truly theirs. And then years after his father's ghostly encounter, Reverend George Reed, who said that Anne died of heartbreak rather than the supernatural, he stayed at Loftus Hall. At the time he knew nothing yet of his father's midnight ordeal, so he didn't know yet about his dad's experience there. No tales of growling or no bed sheets ripped away, no pistols fired in the dead of night. And so, not knowing any better, he chose the tapestry room as his quarters during the visit. Well, it was a quiet night. The fire was low, and Reed was sitting up late reading an article in some magazine. And then the door opened, without warning and without sound. And into the room walked a tall lady, her figure silhouetted by the flicker of the hearth. She made no sound, no gesture. She simply walked slowly across the room, every step deliberate. She crossed to the closet, opened it, and vanished. Reed simply sat there, calm and still, as if the ghostly presence was so gentle that it didn't even freak him out. In fact, he later wrote that he never even considered she was a ghost, at least not in the moment. He said he simply set his magazine aside and decided it was time to go to sleep. It's only in hindsight, with the benefit of time and the ancestral testimony, that he understood what he really witnessed, which is kind of interesting to think about. It's almost like the sound, everything just went quiet. And this woman just gently, she walked into the closet. Maybe by then there had been some remodeling. As we know, they say, so especially if this is a residual haunting, like a just energy that's repeating, she might be walking the floor of, what used to be the layout there. But note that it was so calm, just as some people think these specters can elicit fear in you almost to snack off of it, to feed off of it. Maybe a benevolent, a good spirit is almost like it can present itself and make sure that you're just like, oh, okay. You just stay calm because it's not there to scare you.
Lulls you into a sense of security almost.
Absolutely, absolutely. But the tapestry room wasn't finished yet with Reverend George Reed. The next night, as the fire burned low and the wind whipped across the Hook Peninsula, the door opened again. And just like before, a lady in a stiff brocade stepped soundlessly into the room. She glided across the floor with that same eerie grace.
She could have been a model. So graceful.
I know! She was walking the runway, man. She was not going to sashay away. RuPaul would have been very proud of her. She, again, headed straight for the closet. But this time, George didn't just sit and watch, whereas the previous night, he had almost fallen into a strange sense of calm during the experience. This time was different. He leapt from his bed, heart pounding, and rushed after her with the righteous fire of a man of God. And he cried out as he whipped open the closet, "Ha! I have you now!" throwing his arms around her. And that's when his arms passed straight through her. Instead of wrapping his arms around a ghost, he met the unforgiving embrace of the bedpost, which he struck hard enough to knock himself silly. The next morning, Reed told his father about the incident, still unaware of the family's spectral history. His father, stoic and silent, said nothing, didn't reveal a word about his own experience in that very same room decades earlier. Talk about like, it must be almost like I can't admit that I saw this. Especially if they're from a line of reverends and stuff. Depending on the religion, they might have a certain... It is kind of funny how a lot of religions believe in a god, a devil, angels, demons, but ghosts, well, no. Like, there's, you know what I mean?
Oh, absurd.
You're right. And who knows? Like, maybe every ghost is either an angel or a demon in disguise. Maybe who knows? But it is kind of, when you think about it, it's like, well, how come that's cool, but this isn't? But the spirit didn't return. Night after night, Reed would sleep in the tapestry room waiting for her to appear, and she didn't. It wasn't until some time later that the pieces finally clicked. Reed overheard John Loftus's valet, the same one who had once run screaming out of the room. He heard him grumbling about never wanting to sleep in that cursed room again. Well, George, being curious, asked the valet why. And the valet stared at him for a moment and then said, "Because of her, the woman in the brocade, Anne." And that's when it hit him. The ghost he had seen, the figure he'd tried to grab, was Anne Tottingham. Even into the 19th century, Loftus Hall continued to punish anyone bold enough to sleep too close to the heart, its metaphorical heart, of this house, which was essentially the tapestry room, it seemed. In 1857, the estate passed to the fourth Marquess of Ely, or Ellie once again, an 8-year-old boy who suddenly found himself heir to this home soaked in centuries of legend. Talk about a birthday gift. God damn, 8 years old and get a house. I'll take that. The following year, in 1858, he traveled to the Hall with his mother and his tutor in tow. The halls, by then, were quiet. The candles well kept. The stone was polished and the legends politely buried beneath layers of inherited wealth. You got to think, what a power dynamic that your 8-year-old child is actually the owner of the place.
Yeah.
And you know what I mean? Like, and could, I guess, legit tell you to leave if you wanted to. Like, that's kind of awkward.
Came with the butler and everything, and he's like, "More chocolate milk, pronto."
Yeah, exactly. Like, because that, I just find that so funny. I'm sure maybe there were rules in place that until you're a certain age, there you have like a proxy that essentially handles, because how is an 8-year-old going to handle taxes and shit like that? You know what I mean?
Right. You're spending all the money on toys.
But you're spending all the money on chocolate milk and toys. Well, wouldn't you know it, the tutor that accompanied the family was assigned to sleep in the tapestry room. And that night, the house stayed quiet. No screams or crashes or gunshots, but the next morning, the tutor came down to breakfast in a terrible state. He was pale, sweating, shaken. Something had happened in the night, and yet nothing, no comfort, not curiosity, not command could persuade him to say what had happened. He never spoke of it, not once, not ever, which once again may paint a picture of it's almost seeing the devil is almost not as bad as admitting you saw the devil, or just seeing a ghost is actually preferable to people knowing you saw a ghost. And who knows what their state of mind is, but it seems like that's almost like a theme we've seen throughout, is this almost shame, not even the devil, of just seeing the ghost of a woman. There's almost a shame to not even mention it.
Yeah. And it's also possible that a lot of these people were so traumatized, they didn't ever want to confront it. They didn't want to address it. They wanted to just move on.
Right. A lot of people, say veterans, war veterans, they often, they just never would talk about it. They would never talk about, that was very common, especially for my grandpa's generation and stuff like that, who was in Korea. That was just kind of a common thing. They might tell, oh, well, we did this, we visited here, stuff, but they would never share the awfulness and the horrors that obviously they encountered. Well, Reverend George Reed paid his final visit to Loftus Hall in 1868, and by then, the house had changed. Names once again shifted, the rooms repurposed. Even the tapestry room had been converted into a proper Victorian billiard room. The candles had been replaced by gas lamps. The air of mourning was traded for one of leisure. Curious, George asked, I just realized my notes, I wrote Curious, George, which just sounds like Curious George the monkey.
Curious George.
Well, curious, George asked the housekeeper how the ghost had taken to this transformation. Her reply was, quote, "Oh, Master George, don't talk about her." Her voice dropped, her eyes wide. "Last night, she made a horrid noise, knocking the billiard balls about." Because whether it was a bedchamber, a nursery, or a billiard room, what was once the tapestry room would forever remain Anne's. In a curious twist, a strikingly similar legend is tied to another property entirely. One also once occupied by the Tottingham family, this time at Tottingham Green near Tangman. Same bloodline, different walls. According to the local tale, the devil once again arrived at the house uninvited, unholy as hell, and as usual, charming. And once again, when his true form was revealed, he fled the scene, this time leaping through a dormer window that just so happened to be missing a roof. Now here's where it gets really delicious. Subsequent generations of the Tottinghams refused to ever install a roof over that dormer. Why? Because they feared the devil might still use it, coming and going as he pleased. Why build it if it's just going to keep getting knocked down? He was a guest they couldn't evict. They figured better just let him pass through in silence than risk a return visit through less polite means. As we know, he's got a penchant for busting through walls like the Kool-Aid Man. So why...
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, why keep rebuilding this little section if he's just going to keep blowing through it?
The bastard.
That bastard. Delicious, though, and refreshing. So the hole remained. That is, until a man named James Cullen brought the property years later. A man with no patience for, silly things like ghosts and devils and superstition. Cullen promptly had the dormer roof sealed and closed for good. Of course, if we're chasing the facts that we do have, Charles Tottingham is very unlikely to have ever visited Tottingham Green, this other place we're now talking about. So if he did have a daughter named Anne, and if she did meet a mysterious stranger who made his exit through an open roof, then either the story migrated from one place to the other, or Anne did, perhaps visiting other members of her family, perhaps staying the night during a storm. And if the devil did arrive, who's to say he, rather than leaping through the ceiling, went through the dormer window? Whether it was Wexford or Tangman. Maybe the story's real, it's just we got the wrong locale. Of all the names we have covered that are bound to the legend of Loftus Hall, there's one more to discuss. His name was Father Thomas Broders. He was the Catholic priest, the known exorcist. Broders, as we talked about in the very beginning of this story, he served for 50 years as parish priest of St. James Church in Ramsgrange, just a stone's throw away from the haunted estate. He was also not a man given to ghostly tales. He was a man of ritual and resolve. And according to the lore, when all other efforts failed, when Protestant ministers had tried and failed to quiet the disturbances, it was Father Broders who was summoned. He brought with him a chalice, said to have been his sacred tool since at least 1742, and apparently he did what no one else could. He bound the spirit, silenced the poltergeist, and banished the devil, or what was left of him, from the hall. Or at the very least, was able to confine it. Perhaps still there, just silent. For centuries, that chalice has remained at St. James, a quiet relic of a spiritual war that most had long forgotten. That is until 2011, when the chalice was suddenly stolen. The story made the papers. A holy artifact tied directly to one of Ireland's most infamous hauntings was gone. But here's the good news. It was eventually recovered, like it just showed back up. When Father Thomas Broders died in 1773, he was laid to rest in Whoretown Cemetery. Yes, Whoretown, just no W on the front, but just Whoretown Cemetery. And his epitaph says everything we need to know. It reads, "Here lies the body of Thomas Broders, who did good and prayed for all, who banished the devil from Loftus Hall." And just when you think the legend is settled, when you've named the devil, seen the ghost, and praised the priest who put it all to rest, the dates start wiggling around again. Because while Father Thomas Broders is proudly credited as the man who banished the devil from Loftus Hall, the historical record delivers a troubling wrinkle, of course, right? This can't just make sense. Broders, as we know, died in 1773, and if the more widely accepted versions of the tale are to be believed, Anne Tottingham died in 1775, 2 years later. So how then could he have been the one to exorcise the house when it was 1775 when the whole shebang apparently happened? So what does this mean? Well, maybe the tale was twisted over time. The timeline's blurred and tangled to the point that it has almost become indecipherable. I think this episode is pretty much indecipherable. Maybe Broders did perform a cleansing just after Anne's death, but during some earlier incident that the house conveniently forgot to write down. Or maybe there was no exorcism at all. Maybe the devil was never cast out. Maybe he simply left when he was good and ready to leave. And the stories of chalices and banishment were just the living's way of pretending that they had some kind of control over what was happening in the house. That part is just human nature. We write the endings we need. We give the devil a door, but we also need someone to push him through it. So maybe the tale of Anne Tottingham and the devil in disguise doesn't hold up to historical scrutiny. Maybe the timelines don't really fit. Maybe the records don't match, but the ghosts, they're very real. And over the years, countless witnesses to this day have reported eerie sightings and experiences inside of Loftus Hall. Phantom voices, the sense of being watched, and more than once the same apparition as described, the female, unusually tall, dressed in antique clothing, drifting through the shadows of the upper rooms. In 2014, a man named Thomas Beavis was touring the hall with family, snapping casual photos on his phone. He saw nothing at the time, but later, going through the pictures, he noticed in one of the windows 2 shadowy figures. One, a tall woman, standing in the window looking out at the courtyard. The other, much smaller, possibly a child, standing just beside her. Its features are indistinct, but it seems to have long hair pulled back, or is perhaps wearing a bonnet or a cap. The woman, though, her face is visible. Her hair swept back from her forehead, her dress drawn up into a high collar around her neck. One hand slightly raised as if reaching forward, or maybe simply resting on the sill. But what unsettled Beavis most was her expression. She wasn't smiling, nor was she angry looking, but she did look aware, as if in that split second, she noticed the camera. No taking pictures, folks. And maybe that's the real story of Loftus Hall, not a tale of cloven hooves and heartbreak, or even a sanctified banishment of Old Scratch himself, but a house that watches you back, and a woman, whoever she truly was, still standing at the window, still waiting, still watching, forever suspended in time. The photo taken by Thomas Beavis has been passed around online for years. Maybe we'll try and find it and put it on our socials. Always with the same question: who are they? At first glance, you might think it's a reflection, maybe just 2 visitors passing by and their shapes just happen to get caught in the glass. But that theory doesn't hold. These figures are standing in opposition to the crowd outside, facing a different direction entirely. Their positions don't match the angle of any reflection. And if it were just light or coincidence, then explain this. They look three-dimensional, not sharply defined, but still solid, as if standing just inside the room. Almost like when you're streaming something and it doesn't pause, it doesn't buffer, but like things get cloudy. It's almost like that. Like it's there. It hasn't stopped yet, but it's like the cloudy. We were watching WrestleMania the other night, and every now and then the Wi-Fi would get a little bit cloudy, but you could still see the blurry figure, and then it would snap back. I think I just had the router in the wrong place, and maybe that's the problem here. Some have speculated that the image shows Anne Tottingham with her mother. A poignant idea, but it doesn't quite fit. The taller figure, while mature, appears to be just entering adulthood. And the smaller one seems to be around 9 or 10, perhaps. Seems too small to be her daughter, and too young to be her mother. If anything, they look more like sisters, standing side by side, perhaps Anne and Elizabeth, watching the world pass by them. Or perhaps it was the child Anne died with in childbirth, as some legends tell. At the end of the day, while there might be an Anne haunting the place, who knows what version of Anne it is? Today, Loftus Hall is known far and wide as the most haunted house in Ireland, a title printed on brochures and etched into folklore. These days, the female ghost is said to still roam the hall, silently, like a memory slowly fading from the wallpaper. The house she knew may have been pulled down and rebuilt and repainted and renamed, but she still walks. Now, I wanted to add this quick bit on here because I was doing my research for this episode and it sounded so familiar, to the point that I was wondering if we had covered it in the almost 250 episodes that we've made here on Creep Street. Well, episode 88, back in August of 2021, we covered the story of the Dublin Hellfire Club, and its story bears a lot of resemblance. In Ireland, there are two places where the devil is said to have paid a visit, at least popularly known. Two places where a charming visitor came knocking, where storms were rattling, and where people were playing cards, a game that would turn into a reckoning. One is Loftus Hall. Its halls thick with the grief and the spray of the sea. The other sits high above Dublin, hunched like a watching gargoyle atop Montpelier Hill, the Hellfire Club. The stories are not twins, but they are kin. At Loftus Hall, the legend curls slow and tragic. A storm rolls in from the sea, and a stranger arrives at the door, drenched in the rain, yet refined and welcomed in. Over the days that follow, something blooms, a connection, a courtship, a thrill, a romance. Then one evening, seated at the card table, Anne drops the card. Bending over to retrieve it, she sees the cloven hoof beneath the table. She screams, the stranger vanishes upward through the ceiling, leaving scorched plaster and a girl unraveling in her mind. Now shift the scene to Dublin, to the Hellfire Club. Climb that hill into Dublin's cold, cold breath. It's the 1700s, and the men of the Hellfire Club are deep in their cups, candles flickering, laughter booming like thunder in the rafters. They drink, they gamble, they dare God himself to stop them. Many legends surround this group, some saying that they were a murderous cult. If you go back in that episode, I believe some believed they were it was like a group of almost like a secret society, like a Bohemian Grove, and it's like sometimes they'd kill for fun. Or some just thought it was an exclusive men's club for men. And so people naturally think, oh, they must be evil because they're the rich and powerful meeting, and who knows. Well, in that legend, the gentlemen are having a rowdy game of cards on a stormy night when a gentleman knocks. Polite and collected, he's invited in to join their game. And just like at Loftus Hall, a card falls. The player leans down to find the same damn thing, a sulphurous cloven hoof. The man jolts back in horror, and in the blink of an eye, the guest vanishes. Some say he blasted through the roof, but others say he just grinned and went out in a blaze of fire. 2 locations, 2 storms, 2 card tables, 2 glances under the tablecloth that changed everything. But here's where they diverge, and why they each carry their own flavor of dread. The Hellfire Club is wild, feral, and indulgent. It's a tale of arrogance being punished, The men who mocked sacred things got exactly what they asked for. It's a comeuppance. A pack of privileged assholes and thrill seekers calling for the devil to appear as if it's a party trick until he actually shows. But Loftus Hall is something else. It's quieter, much sadder and gothic in the truest sense. It isn't about acts of sacrilegious, blasphemous things. It's about love and longing and a girl who opened her heart and let something terrible in. She didn't summon him for sport. She welcomed him unknowingly. And when she saw the truth, it shattered her. One tale is about punishment, the other is about betrayal. At the Hellfire Club, the devil burned the curtains and laughed as he left. At Loftus Hall, he left something behind. A wounded girl who sat in the tapestry room for days, waiting for someone who would never come back. In both legends, the devil is not some horned brute storming in with fire and brimstone. He's elegant. He's clever. He sits at the table and smiles kindly and waits for you to look down. Because the devil doesn't have to kick down the door. He only has to knock. And the horror of Loftus Hall, unlike the Hellfire Club, does not come from the devil's arrival. It comes from the moment you realize you let him in. Folks, that wraps up The Devil Came to Loftus Hall. Now, I think you can understand why we didn't split this into two parts, because the second half, it wouldn't make sense, I think, if it wasn't attached. Because it's all just, as you can tell, it is a web of similar names, records that might not be true, records that might be hidden because of aristocratic shame. If there's a lesson to be learned in this, it's more complex than the Hellfire Club, which is don't be a dick, don't tempt the devil. This is a story about loving those who are lost. Loving, even if it means others might look differently at you, it means loving your family. Even if you don't agree, even if you think they're nuts, you got to love them. You got to cherish them. It's a much deeper, I think, and a much more haunting, sad, like it said, a gothic story. It's almost like Wuthering Heights or something like that. It's a tale of lost love. Like we said, it's also possible she did meet a charming young man. Maybe the father did something, or the devil himself spirited him away and took his place. We don't know. Obviously, it's all legend. And what makes this so fun is you also can't discredit it, because there's always one more thing. You get the rug pulled out under you in both ways. Right when you think, okay, it didn't happen, there's another card dropped on the floor. You find another card dropped on the floor, just like Anne did. And then you think, okay, maybe it did happen. Then something else comes up and you're like, okay, no, it didn't. Then, oh, wait, maybe it did, just over here at this place. I mean, it's a story that I'm really glad we did this. But Gage, I guess, so what do you make of this? I mean, whether real or not, it's almost a beautiful story. It's like a beautiful, tragic tale in a way.
It really is. You mentioned it, how cinematic it is earlier. I mean, it really does paint such a vivid picture, and especially the moment of her seeing the hoof and just that scene of him standing up and revealing himself to everyone in the room before bursting through the ceiling. I mean, it sounds like such a perfect scene for a horror film. Now, as to the validity of the story, obviously it's so convoluted, and the time change, like the different years involved and the names and everything, but also the similarities to the Hellfire Club story make me think that this has to be a story that has some truth to it, that got just changed or misinterpreted or miscommunicated over the years, but that something happened. Something happened. It's like, how did this exact story happen, but it's under a different context? This time at the Hellfire Club, it's about a bunch of dickheads. It's kind of like Roger Downs. It's like Roger Downs from our last episode. It's like a group of guys like that, of rich a-holes who essentially they mock religious artifacts and welcome the devil to join them. And of course,
he comes and scares the high holy hell out of him. It's like, whereas this is a more complex tale and a more human tale. I would argue even it's more about the people than the devil.
Absolutely. I think the Hellfire Club is like a tale of karma, whereas Anne's story is one of tragedy.
Right. Absolutely. Absolutely. Because part of you, when you look at the Hellfire Club, you're like, well, yeah, they deserved it. Whereas Anne did not deserve what happened to her, which is truly like what you think the devil would do. For the devil to come, and you would almost think the devil would prefer that you do the things those guys were doing at the Hellfire Club.
Right. He'd be like, hey, that's cool. Let me pull up a chair and join you fellas. Take all your money.
Yeah, you'd think he would prefer that. Whereas like what he did to Anne was truly evil.
And the devil is the ultimate sadist.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. So maybe someone took that framework and put it on this other tale. But wow, I'll tell you what, Gage, I got a list of names that I wouldn't mind knocking on my door in the dead of night.
Oh yeah? Who's that?
The list of our Patreon subscribers. Of course, the Dream James Watkins, the Finnish Face via Lungfist, the Madman Marcus Hall, the Tenacious Teresa Hackworth, the Heartbreak Kid Chris Hackworth, the Oh-So-Suave Sean Richardson, the Notorious Nicholas Barker, the Terrifying Taylor Lashmet, the Count of Cool Cameron Corliss, the Archduke of Attitude Adam Archer, the Sinister Sam Kiker, the Nightmare of New Zealand Noeline Vivilli, the Loathsome Johnny Love, the Carnivorous Kevin Bogey, the Killer Stud Carl Staub, the Firestarter Heather Carter, the Conqueror Christopher Damian Damaris, the Awfully Awesome Annie, the Murderous Maggie Leach, the Serve Sexy Sam Hackworth, the Evil Elizabeth Riley, Lauren Hellfire Hernandez Lopez, the Maniacal Laura Maynard, the Vicious Karen Van Buren, the Arch Nemesis Aaron Bird, the Sadistic Sergio Castillo, the Rapscallion Ryan Crum, the Beast Benjamin Huang, the Devilish Chris Doucette, the Psycho Sam, the Electric Emily Zhang, the Ghoulish Gert Hankum, the Renegade Corey Ramos, the Crazed Carlos, the Antagonist Andrew Park, the Monstrous Michaela Schur, the Witchy Wonder J.P. Weimer, the Freaky Ben Forsyth, the Barbaric Andrew Barry, the Mysterious Marcella, the Hellacious Cale Hoffman, and Pugblorb, the Poltergeist. Folks, thank you so much for listening. We love you, of course. I won't ramble on because this is probably a longer episode, but we thank you so much. Give us your feedback. Give us your suggestions for episodes. If there's something you want us to cover, please reach out on any of our socials. Don't be scared. We'll happily respond and chat with you and stuff like that. But of course, citizens of the Milky Way, my name is Dylan Hackworth.
And I'm Gay Charlie.
Good night and goodbye.